And here we go. Craig, the college football playoff rankings released last night. There is one change. Florida State drops to 5. Washington is at number 4. They had yet another nice win. Michael Penix and the Huskies are unbeaten. And you wonder, is that Washington's resume, which is really good and better than maybe anybody on that list, or is that the possibility Jordan Travis is injured?
I think it's very clearly it's Washington's strength of schedule. I think that's pretty clear what the reasoning was. You can't really penalize Florida State just yet based on just the Jordan Travis injury. I think to do that would be a real sham of the whole process. Granted, if they get into a situation where there's a gridlock and you're trying to whittle it down to who is the best team, then sure, it would ultimately come down to that. But there's still a couple of games to play, so I don't think you start to ping Florida State for that just yet. I'm sure for some voters there may have been that element, but I think really what you're looking at is the fact that Washington just went and beat Oregon State. I mean, that's a win on the road. You're unbeaten. You're healthy. So, yeah, I think that's just very clearly the fact that Washington has the better resume. Now, you may wonder, if we're talking resumes, then why are they just at 4? Why aren't they even higher? But, there is the other part of the eye test and whatever else people want to throw into the mix of why they vote for things. But, yeah, I mean, pretty much as is the top 4 except for that major change. And I think that's directly a result of what you've actually gone out in the field and proven when it comes to the Huskies.
Was Washington State this weekend, the Apple Cup, of course, earlier this week, they announced they would resume or they would extend the series, the rivalry, despite the Pac-12 being blown up and Washington State being left along Oregon State on an island at this particular time. Georgia won, Ohio State 2, Michigan number 3. Those 2 and 3 will play Saturday morning, 11 o'clock. And again, Dan Hope will join us a little bit later on in this show to discuss the Buckeyes. Washington at 4. Now, let's look at the alphas. Florida State 5, unbeaten. Oregon at number 6, the only losses against Washington, and a chance, if they can beat Oregon State, that they'll play Washington again for the Pac-12 championship. Texas remains 7. They've been kind of like just simmering right there. Haven't been able to move up. They have Texas Tech Friday. Most likely they're going to play in the Big 12 championship game. Craig, among those in front of them, if everything was to at least remain status quo, which I know teams are going to play each other, who does Texas need to see lose for sure that's reasonable for them to get into the college football playoff?
Well, I think Oregon right there in front of you, Florida State right there in front of you, and then Ohio State, Michigan should take care of itself. Now, with the winner or the loser of that game, would it be a close enough game where if it's Michigan, let's say, I guess it doesn't really matter. If Michigan or Ohio State, do they fall all the way, 3 or 4 spots down, or do they only drop to, let's say if it was Ohio State 4 or 5 or Michigan to, 4, 5, or 6. I don't know. A lot of it depends on the things that we don't know, which is how do you lose the game? I mean, it's one thing to lose, but if you're Michigan, Ohio State, and it's triple overtime and you lose by 1 and you're Ohio State and you're on the road, how much are you going to get pinged for that versus you get blown out by 25? So it's hard to say exactly, but I think Texas is sitting in a really good spot. Obviously, 4 of the teams in front of them have to play each other. So they have a great opportunity, especially, with Oregon right there in front of them, to leap on over with a win. And same would go. I think they'd leap over Washington as well. But, I think Ohio State, Michigan, that'll boil down to the stylistically how that happens. But if you're Texas, I think outside of, being 5 or 6, I mean, you're in a really good spot. And even not being 5 or 6, I don't think really matters right this very moment with still, again, 2 weeks to play. Running out of time to make too many moves, but knowing that there's going to be at least 2 teams in front of you losing, and one of them or another one also has a quarterback injury at this point, I think you feel great. The only one that maybe you feel is not going to be shaken too much is Georgia probably, but they still got to play Alabama. So, I mean, there's a lot of chaos that can still happen. Shoot, Texas could still lose. But, I think they feel great about where they are right now for sure.
Gary, let me ask you this. When you look at names, and let's not be naive here. Texas has the logo. Obviously, Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia, Alabama. If Alabama was to run the table, which means they beat Auburn and then, of course, would upset Georgia, do you think that Alabama, despite the loss to Texas, if they finish that way and the game with Georgia is 23-20, Do you think that could block Texas out, and Alabama in that scenario ends up, even despite the head-to-head loss in September, jumping UT?
I think there's going to be a lot of people, especially in SEC homer type per se, that would be rooting for that. But I still think I'm of the camp where head-to-head matters. And Texas went on the road into Bryant-Denny and took care of Alabama. I don't see a situation where they could jump them like that. My more so concern is how does it play out to where conference champions get left out? Like if Michigan, Ohio State play, that's going to eliminate one of them. So then you have Florida State right there, who's undefeated, and they would be the ACC champion if everything plays out. Like you're going to have a log jam of a situation where you have like 3 or 4 conference champions in a situation where Texas is going to have to jump onto them to get in. I don't know how that's going to shake out.
But they would be a conference champion, too. Oh, you're talking about if Georgia runs the table.
Yeah, if Georgia runs the table, then you have Michigan.
Ohio State, no matter what, whoever
Right.
wins the Big 12, Big 10 title.
And then you have an opportunity where you have the winner of the Pac-12, the way it sits right now, regardless, is ahead of Texas, right? Like say if
Right.
it's Washington or Oregon, whoever wins that, they're still ahead. And then Florida State's ahead, whereas they would win the ACC. Like, how does that shake out?
That could happen.
I think, but as far as like the Bama scenario, there's no way, in my opinion, Bama should jump Texas due to the head-to-head in Bryant-Denny.
But the first year that they ever
Correct.
did this, Craig, was a head-to-head that did not come into play between TCU Baylor in 2014. But that, again, was 9 years ago, and a lot has changed. Plus, you have the UT involved in that. They've got to take care of their business. Tech Friday night in Austin, and then, of course, whoever they play most likely at AT&T Stadium in Arlington.
Yeah, and I don't think the head-to-head really played in with TCU and Baylor as far as, like, them getting jumped by Ohio State. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't – you're saying could Texas pass or could Alabama pass Texas, but the thing with TCU and Baylor wasn't them hopping each other. It was them getting hopped by Ohio State or not being able to jump over Ohio State.
Because they did not have a championship game data point.
Right.
That's
so
the bottom line.
Yeah. So, I mean, there wasn't I can't believe TCU finished. Well, TCU didn't finish in front of Baylor. TCU finished behind Baylor. Baylor won the head-to-head. So I think that it's, kind of similar, but not really the same thing because of the fact that, that they were more worried about others as opposed to this scenario where Bama's just jumping Texas just because they look better. That really wasn't the deal then. But I think the conversation of that even happening is ridiculous. I think that's just a silly conversation that, Feinbaum must be having on his show or something because I could only see Alabama fans really making a strong case for why that would make any sense whatsoever. Because other than just roll tide, it would make no sense with Texas having the only loss to Oklahoma in a close game at that, where they lost the lead late with time running out, and they very clearly beat Bama. I mean, very clearly went into their place and beat them and beat Jalen Milroe. And what are we going to start? Oh, well, he was only in week 2 form. He's in week 12 form. I mean, how much do we want to tweak things? So yeah, I mean, it's one thing to sit there and view, I guess, Florida State in a little bit of a different way. I guess I don't even agree with that, but I can see where at least you're looking at it that way. But I don't see how you're looking at this and going, well, Bama, with the eye test, I mean, I don't know what you're going for because Texas has had a pretty good eye test along the way as well. So, yeah, I don't think that should happen at all.
I bet that's closer than we think, but it shouldn't happen. If, in fact, if Alabama beats Auburn and then beats Georgia, they absolutely will make that a difficult decision, whether it's not Texas that they jump or somebody in front of them, depending on if Oregon, Washington end up flipping wins. If Oregon wins the Pac-12 title with a win against Washington, that will be interesting to see what happens with that.
I mean, it feels like we're at the end of the road, but, I mean, there's also, as you mentioned, a lot of really big games left. So
big games.
We don't have to figure it out right now. They're setting the chessboard to make whatever maneuvers need to be made the next couple of weeks, but obviously this weekend will be very telling, and then championship weekend will be absolutely massive. So this whole, can Alabama do that? Well, shoot, okay, let's go see them beat Auburn, which is probably going to happen, but then let's go see them beat Georgia, and then let's have that conversation because otherwise it's still pretty unrealistic. And I think, again, if you're Texas and you've got Texas Tech, who, is playing really hard and tough, but Texas stops the run well, and, it's going to be interesting with them at home to see what Tech can do to make that competitive. And then the following week, probably against Oklahoma State, I think you definitely take their path versus take the path of an Alabama having to play at Georgia, probably even a Florida State having to play. It's a middling Florida team, but then a really pretty good Louisville team.
Yep.
And
Top
then,
10.
Yeah, and then, obviously the Pac-12 is what that is. So, again, I'll go back to I think Texas is sitting pretty. I don't think they get jumped by Alabama, but, if Bama goes and wins these next two, then that'll be a more realistic conversation to have. But right now, I think that's I think that what we have happen is like the fear-mongering of like, well, what if, and, if we're
that's
talking,
what we do, though.
Let me finish my thought.
Okay,
like it's one
go
thing
ahead.
if it's one thing if it's like a Tulane or something like that. I think we're talking about Texas, though. We're talking about the brand that is Texas. I don't think there's too many teams that are going to be hopping over UT.
That's how I started out,
Yeah.
though. Is that if it was somebody that wasn't a brand name, then you would probably look at scenarios, and I bet that would be really difficult for the committee to not, if it's a non-brand name, to give them the opportunity to play in the champ or semifinals. That's what's interesting about it. That's why I brought up 14, because TCU and Baylor had that game, but neither one of them, no matter how good they were, and they were both very good, they're the logos. And no matter what, and we'll see what happens this year among the top 5, 6, or 7, 8 teams. Wouldn't you say, Garrett and Craig, that all of them are logos? If you look at them, every one of them, maybe not some as high as others, but all of them are brand names.
No, I think you could definitely make a case for that. I mean, Washington, to me, like from my perspective, because I don't remember their heyday when they were winning championships, I would say that could be more of an argument from a modern standpoint, but they're definitely still a brand.
Yeah, I mean, it's all brands. I think that's, something that the committee's got to be very excited about. It's a lot of SEC, a lot of Big Ten, but then the biggest brands out in the other leagues as well. And I know what point you're getting at, but that's the thing. That's like the double whammy of like, is this like Baylor TC? No, because for one, it's Texas. For two, they have the head-to-head, and I think the scenario is different. So yeah, that's what we do. We speculate on this, but again, it's one thing to get too far down the line knowing that there's these, like, let's see Ohio State, Michigan, and what that could look like. So I think to see some more evidence is what's going to be needed, obviously, here. And if we get into that scenario, that'll be a very interesting conversation to have. If Alabama's able to pull off the sweep the rest of the way. But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting final 2 weeks to see, who may stumble and who may not. But if you're Texas, I mean, you're as big of a brand as it gets. So just win your games and see what happens around you. But I wouldn't be worried too much about getting hopped. If I was TCU or Baylor, I would. If I had a commissioner who wasn't willing to stick his neck out on the line and declare head-to-head something, I would. But that's not really what they're facing right now. Although the threat of Bama having beat Georgia is obviously something that anybody, I guess, in front of them, whether it's Texas or whether it's Oregon or whatever, I think probably have to be mindful of, because obviously a lot of people are talking about the Tide's resurgence here over the last few weeks.